The Grizzlies wrapped up preseason game number 2 last night, and look, I think a new dynamic duo is forming right now while Morant is out, but it's deeper than that. Ziaire Williams got the start, and you know what? We got to talk about how he looked. We got to talk about some other things going on from the game as well. We're breaking down the second preseason game coming up right here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer from the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Want to thank you all for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies each and every day, and especially for today's edition as we break down preseason game number 2. I'm going solo today without my co-host Joe Molinax. Joe Molinax is getting a well-deserved day off. But I want to thank you for tuning in with me on today, because today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase Case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. That's Jase. It's Jase medical.com. The preseason slate is moving along at this rate. The Grizzlies are already 2 games in, and man, do we have a lot to talk about from game 2. Just getting the who played stuff out of the way first, because that's probably the most important thing if you didn't watch the game. But if you did, probably already know this, but we'll provide some context details on why certain guys were out. Marcus Smart remains out with the abdominal soreness injury. I'll have more of an update on his status in our next episode, so make sure you stay tuned for that as well. Steven Adams, he kind of got a day off. So, again, Steven Adams is ramping up. We have seen him play more. As of late, we've seen him practice full pretty much, but the Grizzlies have said this is a ramp-up period for him. No limitations from a season perspective. He's expected to be ready when the season gets here, and he's probably going to play a little bit more in the preseason. But again, Grizzlies are ramping up Steven Adams, so nothing more than a day off. No harm, no foul there. Also, John Conchar was out in the game as well. Vince Williams still hasn't played in the preseason. Two-way guy who impressed a lot of us in Summer League with his spot-up three-point shooting. So a lot of guys were out. So the Grizzlies were pretty much 12 deep instead of 15 that they played in the first preseason game. But you know what that meant? They gave us a larger sample size on some of the guys that the Grizzlies have been waiting to see. But before we get to all those guys, we got to get to some guys that you've seen for the last 3 years, and you've seen a lot of. And I want to focus on 2. And those 2 players are Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. We've talked about Jaren 100 times over. We talked about Desmond Bane 100 times. We talked about how big this upcoming season is for these 2 guys. But I just want to say, so far, they're meeting the challenge. And if you've watched Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane play through these first 2 preseason games, I don't know how you aren't impressed with what you're seeing if you're not. If you aren't impressed with what you're seeing from Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane up to this point, you see my ex, formerly known as Twitter account, is attached below if you're watching on YouTube. But if you're not, it's at Damichael C. Or you can jump in our YouTube comment sections or somewhere. Let me know, basically. That's where I'm getting at. If you think Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. are standing out, tell me what you're seeing that I'm not seeing. Because so far, I give both guys an A for how they are meeting the challenge as to playing without Ja Morant. Now, granted, I always got to add context when I say these things. The Indiana Pacers defense from the regular season, preseason opener, preseason opener. Nothing scares me about that defense that the Grizzlies played against. Miles Turner was pretty much matched up against Steven Adams, so it's not like Jaren had to go against him. He had Obi Toppin, and he, dominated that matchup. And then Desmond Bane, nothing really stood out to me about the Pacers' perimeter defense that was going to limit him in any way. Same kind of thing in this game against the Bucks. Chris Middleton is one of their better perimeter defenders. Drew Holiday isn't in the building no more. But basically, the Bucks started Cam Payne, Malik Beasley, and Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder is a pretty good defender in his own right, but none of that scares me in terms of one of the guys I want to see Desmond Bane go against where I can say, oh, yeah, he's really that guy now. So keep all that in context. But what I'm seeing is two guys who clearly have it in their minds. We got to be the guys right now. I'm not talking about who they're going against and all that stuff. I'm talking about the mindset. I'm talking about the mentality that these guys are displaying. And just getting to the numbers real quick. If you go back to the first game, Desmond Bane shot 5 of 13 from the field. Remember what I was saying about Jake LaRavia when I said you just want to see him get shots up? That's what when Desmond Bane shoots 5 of 13 from the field in his first preseason game, who cares? Because guess what? The last 3 seasons have showed us when the season ends, his effective field goal percentage is going to be very high. His 3-point percentage is going to be above 40%, and he's going to be averaging, a decent amount of points per game. So 5 of 13 doesn't really bother me. But what I liked was 17 points. He got to the free throw line 6 times, and he had 4 assists, 3 turnovers too. Had 3 turnovers in both games, I think, for Desmond Bane. So that is a little bit concerning. I think he had 4 turnovers in the last game, but a couple of them were illegal strains and things like that. But that was game 1 for Desmond Bane. Second game, 8 of 14, because again, it's Desmond Bane. He's gonna kind of get to the mean at some point. 8 of 14 shooting, 4 of 6 from the 3-point line, which we'll talk about the 3-point line in our third segment later on in today's show. But 21 points to lead the Grizzlies, and here's my favorite: 5 rebounds, 5 assists. That's where Desmond Bane has to be. Last year, I think he averaged over 4 boards, over 4 assists per game. I'm expecting 5s across the board, along with a 20-plus point season this year from Desmond Bane. Nothing less. Yes, that's lofty expectations for a shooting guard, but the Grizzlies gave him some lofty money. So I think Desmond Bane so far is meeting the challenge. And then there's Jaren Jackson Jr. We talk a lot about Desmond Bane, improving as a playmaker and showcasing his all-around skill set. And I like what he's doing defensively, too. I didn't mention that. But Desmond Bane has gotten in the passing lanes, got his hands on a couple balls, got some deflections and things like that. He's active defensively. Jaren Jackson Jr., we already know what's going on the defensive end. You don't got to really dive into that too much. At the end of the day, first game, 5 blocks. This game, he had 3 blocks. Hold home, keep it pushing. It's what Jaren Jackson Jr. does. He will block your shot if you enter his paint. Now let's talk about the offense, because Jaren has looked good, man. And I think some people saw FIBA. Some people saw him at the 5 and saw him matched up against these centers and saw, he was scoring a little bit here and there, a couple double-digit games here, but it wasn't anything like we saw March and April of the Grizzlies' regular season, or early in that playoff series against the Lakers before they switched Anthony Davis onto him, and then they kind of changed their defensive scheme where they focused in on Jaren a little bit more. But Jaren Jackson Jr. looks good, man. And it's not just looking good. Like I said in our last episode of Locked On Grizzlies, it's not just that he's shooting the spot-up three-pointer and taking advantage of mismatches as he has in the past. Jaren Jackson Jr. took Bobby Portis. Bobby Portis is every bit of 6'10". He took him off the dribble, got to the basket, did a nice Euro up and under. Jaren Jackson Jr. is showing the skill set. And, man, I can't say it enough. The fluidity in his offensive game, with the footwork, he's knocking down, the 3-ball as well. Second game for him, 17 points, 5 of 9 shooting, 2 of 4 on 3-pointers, 5 free throws, and, oh, by the way, 5 boards too in 24 minutes since the rebounding thing has kind of become, a bigger thing to talk about. Not too shabby day at the office. Offensive rebound sliced in there as well. But Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane, this is who they'll have to be. They're probably both going to have to be 20-plus points per game scorer, because for the majority of that game before Jake LaRavia kind of went off in the second half, but for most of that game, they were the only 2 guys in double figures. Ziaire Williams finished with 10 points. We'll talk more about him in a minute. But those 2 guys kind of were carrying the offensive load to a certain degree in both games. Derrick Rose stepped up. in last game. We saw Jake LaRavia step up in this game. So I'm sure as the season goes on through that first 25 game stretch, you're going to have different players. I can see Santi, I can see, Derrick Rose. Luke Kennard hasn't been shooting the ball well yet. It's going to change. He's going to get back to the mean. Someone's going to kind of be that third guy every night, probably. It's going to be a different guy, but that's the thing about the Grizzlies having this depth, and they have, this ability to – so many guys are able to strike. Like, you got Jaren Jackson Jr. and Desmond Bane, but Luke Kennard can go off at any point. Derrick Rose, we saw what he can do from a scoring standpoint. By the way, Derrick Rose didn't score as well in this game, 2 points, 1 of 5 shooting. So I know some people out there say, oh, guess what? He didn't score the ball well this game. What you got to say to Michael? Well, I got to say this, 7 assists. So in other words, that's why Derrick Rose is probably going to be a good addition because, sure, he'll have his off night scoring. But at the end of the day, you look at the box sheet, and guess what? 2 points, 7 assists, +8, a team high +8 from the field. Back-to-back games where he's had the highest plus-minus. 7 assists. He only had 2 turnovers, but I'm telling you, someone who sits courtside was right there. When Derrick Rose turned the ball over, he was visibly upset. He said he hates turnovers. He doesn't want to turn the ball over. I know that was a Tyus Jones trait that a lot of people will miss. Sounds like Derrick Rose focuses in on that same area as well. Speaking of focusing in, the Grizzlies are focusing in on this 5th starter spot. Luke Kennard got the first start. And this time, in preseason game 2, it was Ziaire Williams. We're going to talk about how he did in his showcase, in his audition for the spot, coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, we got to talk about today's title sponsor and one of our sponsors today, and that's Jase Medical. Because, look, Jase Medical is where you should be going to take advantage of your medical opportunities. Jase Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. This is the great part about Jase Medical. All it takes to get a Jase case, you just got to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, you can jump on a quick call with one of the board-certified physicians, and they can get you started. You can get ongoing care from our physicians on any treatment-related questions. I mean, the doctor is right there. You can get the doctor recommended, and they're highly recommended. So make sure you take advantage of those opportunities at Jase Case. And guess what? You can get $20 off right now on these life-saving antibiotics today from Jase Medical. All you got to do is use the code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. Jase Medical is JASE Medical.com. So make sure you go check that out today. Coming up on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to talk Ziaire Williams. He's one of the fan favorites, and he got a start in the second game of the preseason. Let's talk about how he performed coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer here for the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, Tennessee. I want to thank you and appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies today as we talk about all things Grizzlies preseason game 2. In our first segment, we talked about this dynamic duo that's forming. Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane. They both look good. Jaren is already an all-star, and I tell you what, Desmond Bane, if he stays on this 20-plus point per game, 5 rebound, 5 assist journey, might find himself sneaking in to the NBA All-Star game if he stays healthy. So all things considered, Desmond Bane looks good. Jaren looks good. But another player who looked good in the second preseason game was Ziaire Williams. Let's kind of recap this, because if you've been following along with Locked On Grizzlies, if you've been following my coverage at the Commercial Appeal, make sure you continue to follow that as well, because I have a lot more insight as well going on with the team. But I put out a story probably about a week ago talking about how Ziaire Williams was making his case as the 5th starter. We also talked about it here on Locked On Grizzlies. Ziaire Williams, defense has stood out to Taylor Jenkins to the point, at least in the early practices, that you had to figure that he was going to get a shot. He was going to get a shot. And when we talked to Ziaire Williams about it at Media Day, he basically said, I'm ready. You'll see. No one's worked harder than me this offseason. And you're starting to see some of that work. First preseason game, Ziaire Williams came off the bench in that game. 2 of 7 shooting from the field, 6 points. He did have 4 rebounds and 3 assists, in that time. but a little bit more of a limited role in that game for Ziaire Williams. This time, Taylor Jenkins switches him to the starting lineup. We talked about how it's going to be probably a revolving door for that fifth spot for a little bit. Luke Kennard got the first call. This time it was Ziaire Williams. Strictly talking about in the starting roles. If you go from preseason one to preseason game one to preseason game two, Ziaire Williams performed better than Luke Kennard for what the Grizzlies want to see in that starting role. What do the Grizzlies want to see? Well, we talked about it, but just to reiterate on that point, it's all about defense first and foremost. And Ziaire looked good defensively. Now, with our naked eyes, usually when we watch the Grizzlies play defense, most of you are probably watching for the guy just to stay one-on-one in front of his man, and on the ball defense. So I asked David Roddy, I was like, what more does Taylor Jenkins want to see from you guys? And he goes into this long tangent about, communication and help side defense and all these things. But then when I was talking to Taylor Jenkins, he pointed out something about Ziaire that we haven't really even talked about much. We've talked about Ziaire needing to be more physical, getting a little bit stronger and things like that. Taylor Jenkins took it a step further and gave me an example of what that looks like. He said that one area this is after Tuesday's game. He said one area that Ziaire Williams has grown in is his ability to chase down, to kind of fight through screens and chase down offensive players. In the past, there's been a tendency to Ziaire to get stuck on those screens, not be able to get through them, and the guy gets open shots, or the Grizzlies are forced to do a switch, and you have a big onto a smaller, shifty offensive player, and it creates a mismatch. But Ziaire Williams at 6'9", if he can fight through those screens and get through there, his length, even though he's trailing a guy, his length will bother the shot. And those guys either will pass up on that shot or they'll attempt it and they'll miss more times than not, because a 6'9" guy coming into the frame is more than likely going to alter your shot more times than not. So basically, Ziaire Williams looked good defensively in game 2 against the Bucks. And he played well offensively as well. 10 points in a game from the offensive end. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just the 10 points. 4 of 9 shooting overall. He also had 2 assists, no turnovers. Remember, he's coming off a 3-turnover game in game 1. No turnovers this time around. We saw him effective as a secondary facilitator. That's the role I think that fits Ziaire Williams. You may say, oh, what's a secondary facilitator? Well, for lack of a better explanation, we saw in the first game he was playing on the ball a little bit more, and he was bringing the ball up before the Pacers were pressuring him. I think that forced 2 of his 3 turnovers just from trying to dribble the ball up the court, get past tough defense. Well, guess what? When you're going against set defense and the Grizzlies are calling the play, and he's getting the ball coming off a screen, and he gets to that mid-range area, Ziaire said it himself, that midi is his bread and butter. When he gets to that shot, the defense has a choice. Either that big is going to step up, and Ziaire said it himself. He will just dump this. He will dump the bounce pass off to the big man. Easy 2 points. And we saw that with Xavier Tillman. The big stepped up. Ziaire Williams dumped it off to Xavier Tillman. Easy layup around Brook Lopez, one of the NBA's top shot blockers, because he stepped up and he didn't have the angle against Xavier Tillman Sr. If he doesn't step up in that case, guess what? Ziaire Williams takes the mid-range jumper, which he nailed twice in this game. But I like the 3-level scoring potential that he brings from the standpoint of he knocked down a 3 in this game, knocked down 2 mid-range jumpers, and he had an emphatic dunk that a lot of you probably remember when he pump faked at the 3-point line. Jay Crowder went flying by, got to the rim, tomahawk, one-hand dunk, boom. Ziaire Williams is in a competition right now. I think this game by no means solidifies his spot as the 5th starter. And if you go check out my story on the Commercial Appeal, where I talked to Taylor Jenkins and some of the players about that competition. But this doesn't solidify his case, but it makes his case a little bit stronger. I think my guy Sean Coleman, going to put him on the spot a little bit here. Former co-host of mine on Locked On Grizzlies, but Sean Coleman shot me a text yesterday and basically said he likes Luke Kennard coming off the bench better. If you know Sean, he threw me some stats as well, basically saying Luke Kennard's numbers off the bench are really good. And I've talked about how if Luke Kennard comes off the bench, he gives you that that microwave scorer that you need. I don't think Ziaire Williams is a microwave scorer. He's not a guy that's probably going to come off the bench and boom, 10 points in 5 minutes. Luke Kennard can do that, and even faster when that three-point shot is falling at a rapid rate. But all things considered, both of those guys, I think, are good options. So the Grizzlies are kind of creating themselves a good problem when, for the most part, it's been a lot of uncertainty around this position. We'll see if Jake LaRavia and David Roddy will get their calls next. Both players have played really good. Jake LaRavia, 2 preseason games so far, 16 points and 15 points. David Roddy hasn't done as much scoring. I think he scored a total of 20 points through the 2 games, but very, very efficient from the field so far. So all things considered, the Grizzlies are in a good spot with that 5th starter. We'll see how that continues to evolve. But one thing that needs to evolve for the Grizzlies is the three-point shooting. It was a struggle 2 years ago. It was a struggle last season. And nothing we've seen so far in the preseason indicates that the Grizzlies are going to be a better three-point shooting team. But we'll get to that in a second. Before we get to that, we got to talk about FanDuel because, look, FanDuel is where you need to be going right now to take advantage of the terrific opportunities out there in the sports betting world, because FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. Right now, if you're a new customer, if you haven't, I've been telling you guys for the longest to go over to FanDuel, but if you still haven't done that, well, guess what? New customers, you can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets. All you got to do is bet $5. And then, bam, $200 pops up right into your FanDuel account. And it's an easy app to use. You don't know how to bet? Well, guess what? Here's some options for you. You can bet the spreads on games. You can bet the player props, where players will be projected to score a certain amount of points, hit a certain amount of shots, block shots, things like that. You can bet the over-unders. And you can bet much more. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/Locked On. It's where you go to make every moment more, and go check it out right now. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/Locked On to take advantage of this terrific opportunity. Speaking of opportunities, the Grizzlies have a couple more opportunities this preseason to improve on the three-point shooting. Should we be concerned? Let's talk about that next, coming up on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I am Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, right here in the most beautiful land in the world, Memphis, Tennessee. Want to appreciate you guys for continuing to tune in with us, recapping what we talked about through our first 2 segments here. We talked about a dynamic duo leading the way with the Memphis Grizzlies so far. Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., another terrific performance from the duo through the first 2 games. Both guys have been terrific. Ziaire Williams got the start instead of Luke Kennard in the second game. Xavier Tillman started for Steven Adams as well. I think I mentioned that at the top, but I'm not sure. But, I mentioned Steven Adams getting some rest, but Xavier Tillman stepped in, filled in well. Taylor Jenkins like what he saw there. But Ziaire Williams got the start. We talked about him in that segment. But now we got to talk about the shooting. Because we talk about all these good things. We gotta dish out a little criticism too. And just like with the good stuff, where we say we're not overreacting to how good things are going, we're not going to overreact to how well Zaire's playing. I said he still needs to show it more in order to solidify that spot. I said it earlier that Luke Kennard was struggling to shoot the ball. Not, going to overreact to that in any way. But we got to talk about what we're seeing. And what we saw is Ziaire Williams played well in the last game. What we saw is Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. have looked good on both ends. And to the same token, what we're seeing is the Grizzlies can't make three-point shots right now. And here are what the numbers say. You go back to the first game, Grizzlies shot 8 of 38 on three-pointers. That's 21.1%. If you ever made 21.1% on a test in school, you know how hard it is to come back from that. But then there was the second game, where it wasn't much better. More three-point shots, 45 attempts. More makes, 13. But still a paltry 28.9%. So basically the Grizzlies have failed to shoot 30% from three-point range. Now, the good is they've also held their opponents below 30% three-point shooting in both games. The Pacers shot around 25% basically, and the Bucks shot close to 24%. So all in all, despite their struggles, the Grizzlies are still holding their opponents to around 24% three-point shooting. So, hey, if you ain't going to make them, you might as well make sure they don't make them too. They're doing a good job of that. But at the same time, this is what we talked about, right? We talked about this new offensive system. And part of this new offensive system is they're emphasizing spreading the floor, spacing more than ever. I talked about the practice court has this dark 4-point line now where it's very obvious, and whereas in the past it's been a little bit lighter, but they're emphasizing spacing more than ever with the new coaches brought onto the coaching staff. Taylor Jenkins kind of changing the offense up after the half-court offense has had its struggles in the last 2 years. Spacing is a big part of it. Well, guess what? You can spread the floor and guys can stand wherever they want to stand. If those guys aren't capable of knocking down three-point, not capable because all these guys, even Steven Adams is capable of knocking down three-point shots. But if those guys aren't showcasing, they aren't showing teams, you got to make these teams a believer. NBA teams will stand there and say, show me. And then when you show them, okay, bet, we'll close out. But if those guys aren't making three-point shots, that spacing is null and void. I mean, you're standing in the corner and basically you're just standing there. And right now, the Grizzlies, a lot of guys aren't making shots. If we go to the second game in particular, we said 13 of 45 from three-point shooting. Desmond Bane was the anomaly. And again, Desmond Bane and Luke Kennard, when we're talking about shooting struggles, unless they're in some long, weak slump like we talked about in the past, not really going to hover on their three-point shooting that much because you know what it is with those dudes. But as we go down the roster, let's look at some numbers. Ziaire Williams, 1 of 4 from three-point range. Jaren was 2 of 4. Shout out to Jaren Jackson Jr. Xavier Tillman, who has said he's going to shoot more three-pointers this year. He's a big part of making this 5-out thing work because he's a guy who in the past, if you remember earlier years, Xavier Tillman, first 2 seasons, he definitely wasn't unafraid about shooting the three-point shots. As his role changed more, he kind of stopped shooting three-pointers as much. But right now, 0 of 2 in this last game. Derrick Rose had 1 three-point attempt, 0 of 1. Santi Aldama stands out to me because he was 0 of 6. Luke Kennard was 1 of 3. Jake LaRavia was 3 of 10. Kenneth Lofton Jr. was 0 of 5. David Roddy made 1 of his 2 attempts. Jacob Gilyard made 1 of his 2 attempts. There's a lot of guys on there who three-point shooting can kind of be a separator for them. Jake LaRavia is one of those main guys. He was 3 of 10 from three-point range. Again, Jake LaRavia said he belongs in the conversation with Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane as shooters on this Grizzlies team. I'm not ready to put him there yet, but he's taken a lot of three-point shots. He's made some so far. Three-point shot look really good. Maybe right now I say he's not Desmond Bane or Luke Kennard, but that's an elite level, not only just on the Grizzlies, that's an elite level in the NBA. But he's probably in that level that's above a lot of the inconsistent 34% three-point shooting guys that the Grizzlies have, right around league average, right above the league average level, but below the level of a Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane. But Grizzlies got to shoot the ball better, man. And it's not a concern at this point. So I said that's the question that I asked. Are we concerned with what we've seen from the Grizzlies three-point shooting-wise? No. Because, one, Taylor Jenkins says he likes the shots that they're getting up to this point. I think you have to factor in the fact that it's a new offense as well. Talking to Desmond Bane after the game, he said that's part of it. You know, guys have to get comfortable with the new offensive scheme and things like that. And then Derrick Rose, I remember he said that he's still getting to figure out where these guys like the ball. Who can he, toss the ball to from a trailer position that likes that three-point shot? Who likes the corner three-pointer? Who likes it on the wing? All these different type of things he's figuring out about his teammates. They're probably figuring it out about him as well. A lot of different roles being played. Not going to overreact yet because, again, as I said, even the Grizzlies' opponents haven't shot well from three-point range just yet. Another thing that was pointed out to me was the fact that, guys are getting used to the speed of the game. Speed of the game shows up in a lot of ways, and one of those ways is shooting because you can rush your shots because you're used to playing, a little bit slower speed when you're playing pickup games in the summer. NBA closeouts are a little bit faster and things like that. It's just a higher sense of urgency. So with all that being said, shooting isn't quite a concern yet, but it is something we have to point out. We cannot ignore the fact that the Grizzlies have said that they want to be a better shooting team. They brought in guys like Luke Kennard, Derrick Rose. They got Desmond Bane, Jake LaRavia. The goal is to be a better shooting team. But in my mind, we have to see it. We got to see it before we can go on the record and say, oh, this team will be a better three-point shooting team this year. The Grizzlies have shown that improvement. If we want to see improvement with the spacing, you want to see improvement in the half-court offense, they're emphasizing spacing, and they got to knock down shots for that spacing to really matter. That'll pretty much wrap it up for today's show, Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you tune in for our next episode, because we thank you. We appreciate you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. On the next episode, I got that update for you. We're going to talk about Marcus Smart and this abdominal soreness. Should there be some long-term concern there? What more do you need to know about it? I'm going to have all of that covered for you on the next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But we appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies today. And remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcast. Signing out, I'm Damichael Cole. We appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies.